It was an ordinary business flight. Or so the passengers thought. The cabin was filled with the usual hum of conversations, the scent of coffee brewing, and the soft clinking of trays being set down. Among the travelers was an elderly black woman, her face lined with years of wisdom and experience. She sat calmly, staring out the window, as the flight attendant, young and brash, approached her. Little did the attendant know, the woman she was about to insult wasn't just another passenger. She was the owner of the very plane they were flying on. The flight attendant, a woman in her 20s with a sharp, piercing gaze, walked over to the elderly woman's seat with a practiced smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began, her tone laced with condescension. "You'll have to move to a different seat. This area is reserved for first-class passengers only." The elderly woman, who had been calmly sipping her water, raised an eyebrow, not immediately responding. She could feel the judgment in the attendant's eyes, the subtle undertones of racism in the way she was addressed. Despite the disrespect, she remained composed, her grip tightening slightly on her cane. "I've been flying for years, and I've never had an issue," the woman finally said, her voice steady but firm. The attendant, sensing an opportunity to assert authority, insisted, "You need to move, ma'am, it's policy. You don't belong here." As the words left her lips, the elderly woman slowly stood up, her movements deliberate, and for the first time, the flight attendant noticed something. Her demeanor had shifted. The woman no longer looked like just another old passenger, she exuded an air of quiet power. "Perhaps you should double-check your records," the elderly woman said, her voice still calm. "I own this plane." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, the attendant stood frozen. She had no idea who she had just insulted, and she was about to find out the hard way. The attendant blinked in disbelief, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "Excuse me?" she stammered, unsure whether the woman was joking or if there had been a mistake. The elderly woman smiled, but there was no humor in it. She pulled out a sleek, black business card from her purse and handed it to the attendant. The card was embossed with the logo of the airline and beneath it, in elegant silver letters, the name, Amara Richards, CEO and owner of the airline. The attendant's face drained of color as she looked down at the card. Her mind raced, desperately trying to process what was unfolding. Her eyes darted between the woman and the card, but no words came out. "Is there a problem now?" Amara asked, her voice still soft but carrying an edge. "I think we can both agree that I deserve the respect of being treated as an equal. Don't you?" The flight attendant's heart raced as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. She had no idea how to fix this. No easy apology that could undo the damage she had done. She stumbled back, her eyes flicking around the cabin, hoping to find support, but everyone was staring, watching the scene unfold in stunned silence. Before she could respond, another voice spoke up, one that made her spine stiffen with dread. "Everything all right here, Jess?" The captain of the flight, a tall man with graying hair, had emerged from the cockpit. He'd been informed of the commotion, and as soon as he saw who the elderly woman was, his expression shifted to one of immediate concern. Amara Richards stood tall, unbothered by the tension in the air. She gave the captain a nod, her calmness undeniable. "We're fine, Captain, just a misunderstanding." Jess, the attendant, opened her mouth, but no words came out. She could feel the weight of her actions crashing down on her, the humiliation sinking in as the truth settled in the air around her like a thick fog. Amara's gaze never wavered as she turned to face Jess one last time. "I suggest you reflect on your behavior before you serve anyone else on this flight. Respect isn't just something to be earned, it's something that should be given. No matter who the person is." Jess stood there, frozen in place, the weight of her mistake suffocating her. She could feel the eyes of every passenger on her, a mix of judgment and quiet discomfort. The captain, now fully aware of the situation, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Why don't you head to the back for a moment?" he suggested gently, his voice firm yet sympathetic. Jess nodded numbly, her mind a blur as she turned and walked toward the galley. Her face flushed with embarrassment. She couldn't believe what she had done. How could she have been so blind? The woman she had insulted was not only the owner of the plane but also a highly respected business leader. Meanwhile, Amara returned to her seat, her demeanor unchanged. As she sat back down, she caught the eye of one of the other passengers, a younger man in a business suit. who gave her a quiet nod of respect. She nodded back, grateful for the support, but her thoughts were elsewhere. It wasn't just about the flight attendant's ignorance, it was a reflection of something much deeper. Amara had spent years working to overcome discrimination and prejudice in the industry she had built. She'd faced countless challenges, but none of them had ever stopped her from pushing forward. And now, here she was, the owner of this airline, trying to enjoy a simple flight when ignorance reared its ugly head once again. As the plane continued its journey, the captain made a public announcement, trying to smooth things over for the rest of the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the earlier disruption. We appreciate your patience and understanding, and we will ensure that everyone is treated with the respect they deserve. The announcement did little to calm the tension that hung in the air. The passengers were uncomfortable, unsure of how to react to the incident that had just unfolded before them. The elderly woman who had been disrespected had now become a symbol of authority. A reminder that no one was beyond reproach. But for Amara, the incident was more than just a moment of discomfort, it was a lesson in humility. She knew that in her position, she would have to continue fighting against the very prejudices that had led to this situation. And she would do it not with anger, but with strength, grace, and unwavering dignity. As the plane cruised at its steady altitude, Amara leaned back in her seat, her eyes closing for a moment. She could still feel the tension from earlier, but she had long learned to carry such moments without letting them define her. Yet, something about today felt different. Perhaps it was because, even with her success, the world still saw her through the lens of her race and age, always questioning. Always challenging her right to exist in spaces where power was often dominated by others. A soft voice broke her thoughts. "Excuse me, Miss Richards?" Amara opened her eyes to see a young woman standing in the aisle, holding a small note in her hand. The woman was one of the passengers, someone who had witnessed the entire exchange between Amara and the flight attendant. "Yes?" Amara asked, her tone polite but curious. "I just wanted to apologize for the way the flight attendant treated you earlier," the woman said, her voice sincere. "I saw everything. I know it doesn't make up for it, but I felt you deserved to hear that." Amara's expression softened, her lips curving into a slight smile. "Thank you," she replied, her voice warm. "It's not necessary, but it's appreciated." The young woman hesitated, then added, "I think you handled it with so much grace. I couldn't have done it myself." Honestly, Amara shook her head slightly. "It's not always easy, but sometimes you have to rise above it. Not just for yourself, but for the people who come after you." The young woman nodded thoughtfully, as if taking in Amara's words. "I've been working hard to make my way in the corporate world. And I've run into similar situations. Not exactly the same, but still," she trailed off, as if the weight of her own struggles caught up with her. "I know what you mean," Amara said, her voice quieter now. "Every day is a battle. But it's not just about the battles we win, it's about how we hold ourselves in the face of them." The woman smiled again, her confidence bolstered by Amara's words. "Thank you, you've given me a lot to think about." As she turned to walk back to her seat, Amara's thoughts drifted back to the flight attendant. Jess. She had made a mistake. But Amara knew that everyone was capable of growth. Even someone as young and unaware as her. Perhaps this was an opportunity. Not for judgment, but for teaching. It was a shame that it had to happen at her expense. But maybe that's what leadership was. Finding the opportunity in moments like these. Amara leaned forward in her seat, scanning the cabin. The flight was almost halfway over. And she could tell the energy had shifted. The unease from earlier had not entirely faded. But there was a subtle change, a shift in how people were looking at her. It wasn't admiration, necessarily, but it was respect. And sometimes, that was all it took. As the flight continued, the hum of the engines and the soft chatter of passengers seemed to calm. But inside, Amara could feel the weight of the moment still lingering. She had faced many challenges in her life. But this was different. It wasn't just about the flight attendant's ignorant comment. It was about a system, a culture, that continued to undervalue people like her. Despite the progress she had made, she glanced down at the business card she'd given to Jess. The gold lettering of her name seemed to shimmer under the cabin lights. A reminder of the years of hard work, sweat, and sacrifices that had brought her here. But even with all of that, she knew she couldn't change the way the world saw her overnight. Her thoughts were interrupted when the cockpit door opened again, and the captain stepped out, looking a bit more serious this time. He made his way down the aisle toward her, and for a moment, she wondered if something else had gone wrong. But then he stopped at her row, and his expression softened. "I wanted to personally apologize for what happened earlier, Miss Richards," he said, his voice filled with genuine regret. "I can't say enough how sorry I am for that flight attendant's behavior. We take customer service very seriously, and this certainly does not reflect the values of this airline." Amara nodded slowly, appreciative of his words, but her gaze never wavered. "I understand, Captain," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not angry, just disappointed. It's not just about the mistake, it's about the assumptions that were made before I even had a chance to speak." The captain nodded, understanding the depth of her frustration. "We will handle this. She'll be spoken to, and I can assure you, this won't be repeated." Amara met his gaze, and for a moment, the weight of the situation felt lighter. "I'm not looking for retribution. What I'm hoping for is that this can be a lesson for all of us. We can't let ignorance be the driving force behind how we treat each other, whether it's in the sky or on the ground." The captain smiled, clearly moved by her words. "You're absolutely right, Miss Richards. Thank you for your understanding and your perspective." Amara gave him a small nod. "I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me, and I hope the lesson is learned, not just for today, but for every day moving forward." As the captain walked away, Amara's thoughts shifted once more. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. She had turned a moment of disrespect into an opportunity for growth, not just for the people involved, but for herself as well. Looking out the window once again, she couldn't help but think that this flight, though turbulent in its own way, had brought her closer to the person she had always strived to be, someone who not only endured the storms, but grew from them. As the plane began its descent toward their destination, Amara could feel the familiar rush of anticipation that came with arriving at the airport. She had a busy schedule awaiting her, but this flight had already given her more to reflect on than she could have imagined. The cabin crew began their final preparations for landing, and the tension, though still present, seemed to have dissipated somewhat. Jess, the flight attendant, hadn't returned to her duties, and Amara assumed she was likely in the back, dealing with the consequences of her actions. Amara knew this wasn't a simple mistake to sweep under the rug. This was a chance for change, and she hoped that Jess would take it to heart. Just as the plane began its final approach, the intercom crackled again. This time, it was Jess's voice. It was shaky, almost apologetic, and there was a moment of silence before she spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your flight attendant, Jess. I just wanted to take a moment to personally apologize for the situation earlier. I realize now that I made a grave mistake in how I treated one of our passengers. There is no excuse for my behavior, and I take full responsibility for my actions. I am deeply sorry for any discomfort I caused, and I promise to do better in the future." The words hung in the air, an acknowledgement of the wrong done, but also an expression of remorse. Amara didn't know if it was enough for Jess to truly change, but it was a start. It was more than most people would have said in her position. The plane touched down smoothly, the wheels kissing the tarmac with a reassuring thud. As the passengers began to gather their things, Amara remained seated for a moment, deep in thought. The captain had come back to the cabin just before they had landed, his face full of genuine concern. "Miss Richards," he said quietly, leaning in, "I just wanted to thank you again for your patience today. It's rare to see someone handle a situation with such grace and understanding. It's a reminder to all of us that we have the power to make a difference, even in the smallest of moments." Amara nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It's not about being perfect. It's about trying, every day, to do better, and teaching others to do the same." As the passengers began to disembark, Amara stood and adjusted her coat, her mind still processing everything that had happened. She noticed Jess standing by the door, her eyes avoiding Amara's for a moment. Taking a deep breath, Amara walked toward her, pausing just a few feet away. Jess looked up, her face pale and anxious. Amara offered her a calm smile. "Thank you for the apology, Jess," Amara said softly. "I hope you can learn from this. We all make mistakes, but it's how we choose to move forward that matters." Jess nodded quickly, her eyes filled with gratitude and shame. I will. "Thank you for your understanding." Amara nodded and then, without another word, turned and walked toward the exit. The incident had left a mark on her, but it also reminded her of the importance of patience, resilience, and forgiveness. As she stepped into the terminal, Amara's thoughts were no longer focused on the flight. Instead, she felt something more important, a sense of peace. She knew this wouldn't be the last time she faced adversity, but she was ready for whatever came next. Her journey, after all, was just beginning. Amara made her way through the airport, the bustle of travelers all around her, but she was lost in her thoughts. She had learned long ago that every challenge, no matter how uncomfortable, offered an opportunity for growth, not just for herself, but for everyone involved. This flight had been no different. As she walked to the luggage claim area, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a text from her assistant. "Your next meeting has been moved up. They'll be waiting for you at the conference room." Amara smiled to herself. Even amidst the chaos and the small battles she fought every day, she had work to do. Her focus shifted back to the world she had built and the world she still hoped to change. But as she looked around at the people hurrying through the terminal, she knew that change wouldn't come from just fighting, it would come from how people learned to see each other. She grabbed her suitcase from the conveyor belt, and as she headed out toward the car waiting for her, she felt a sense of quiet pride. It had been a tough day. Yes, but it had been a reminder, too. A reminder that every interaction, every moment, carried the potential to leave a lasting impact. A reminder that the fight for respect and dignity was ongoing, but it was worth every step. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she would continue to rise, one small moment at a time. And as Amara Richards stepped into her car, the doors closing behind her with a soft click, she felt ready for whatever came next.